Hi everyone, and welcome to Mutual Exchange Radio. This is Alex McHugh, and I'm here today with C4SS Fellow Cory Massimino. We have a somewhat different episode for you today because Zachary Woodman is going to continue to take some time off. So for this, our 2022 season, myself and Cory will be sharing the hosting responsibilities so that we can keep producing episodes on a monthly basis. After this episode, we'll be back to our regular format, and you can look out for my interview with Sarah Squire of Liberty Fund in February. Fans of poetry and English lit should be sure to check that one out. So Cory, I've got some questions written down for you, but we can go back and forth a bit and help the listeners get to know both of us a little bit better. Is there anything that you want to say to folks before we dive into the questions?
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Alex, and I thank you for kind of looping me in to appear more on Mutual Exchange Radio. I'm not sure if every listener saw, but I was on a couple months ago where I interviewed Charles Johnson and Gary Chartier for the 10th anniversary of The Market's Not Capitalism book. But beyond that, I've never actually been on, even though I've been involved since the beginning. I know we've been doing it for a couple of years now, and I've always been involved in producing and trying to contact guests and stuff like that. And obviously the name kind of came over from our Mutual Exchange Symposiums that I edit and organize. So I'm kind of excited to be a little more involved in Mutual Exchange Radio in this part and this year, and to interview some interesting folks, including yourself, I guess, today. I think I do have some interesting questions for you, but also interested to hear what you have to ask me. So yeah, thanks for having me on, and I hope we have a good season.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm excited to get to answer some questions too and kind of be on the other side of the interview as well. But I will tell you from the back end, you may not have seen this yet, but the episode you did with Gary Chartier and Charles Johnson was well listened to, so that was also part of the impetus, is you did such a great job with that one.
Well, that's really kind of you to say. Although I have to think that a big reason for the popularity of that one was because of the guests being and the topic as well. But I do appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, no, definitely a really interesting topic. And I'm excited to have you doing more of the interviews with me. The first question I kind of wrote down, you got into a little bit already, is just, on a basic level, what do you do at C4SS in your academic work, in your free time? Who is the Cory Massimino?
Wow. That's a tough one. Well, my solution always, whenever, like on Twitter, you have to have your little bio under your name. And for years, I feel like I would always try to encapsulate, right, like all those things that you just asked me on my Twitter bio. And at some point, I just got really sick of it and found it annoying. And so for a while now, my Twitter bio has just been, we are what we repeatedly post, which is a play on another person's summation of Aristotle's views, but applied to the realm of Twitter. So try to avoid narrowing myself down, I guess. But what I do with C4SS now is a lot. Well, I just got done finally after, I'm sure anyone who had heard about our Egoism Mutual Exchange has been very patiently waiting. I think everyone's patience. I just got done editing and finishing the introduction for that, and which we're going to start publishing those next month, February. So the one thing, and my favorite thing probably that I've done at C4SS, is kind of organize and edit these Mutual Exchange Symposiums where we have different authors from different backgrounds kind of hashing out key areas of interest in anarchist theory and current events. And hopefully make a productive exchange out of it. We've turned a couple of them into books, and I hope we do that with the Egoism one. In the past, if you've seen before, we've done Anarchy and Democracy. We've done Free Markets and Corporate Capitalism, and some others. We also did Fighting Fascism, about free speech and political violence. So this new Egoism one is a long time coming, but I hope it lives up to the hype. I think it's an interesting topic, and I think we will get into egoism a little bit maybe later in the interview when I ask you questions. Aside from that, most of what I do with C4SS is the social media. So if anyone has any problems or is annoyed by C4SS social media, I will take full blame and responsibility. for that, because I basically have a fair amount of discretion and run the social media, and I have for like 2 or 3 years now. And so that is a couple hours each week of like reading every article that we post on the website, and trying to share that on social media, get our ideas a little more popular. So aside from those things, I guess now I'm going to be co-hosting, or not co-hosting, but hosting a few episodes, in this next season of Mutual Exchange Radio. Aside from C4SS, I've been able to do some academic writing. I did contribute to the Rutledge Handbook on Anarchism, which was edited by Gary Chartier, co-edited by Gary Chartier, and I'm going to butcher the other person's last name but his first name's Chad. Believe me, the other editor. And so for that volume, I contributed a chapter on Murray Rothbard called "Two Cheers for Rothbardianism," kind of what to take from his ideas and what to leave behind and what to add to them. And maybe we'll get more into that later. And other than that, I've done some popular writing as well. I have a couple popular pieces in the works for maybe C4SS or other websites, just on various topics related to political theory and philosophy, which is what I tend to write about. As for free time, I don't know. I like movies, TV, comic books a lot. I entertain myself with those various mediums a lot, and that's kind of what I do. I would say a lot outside of the realm of politics. So it'd be great if we can discuss. I know we have some areas, some movies that we both really like.
Yeah. We were joking before we hit record about making this an hour of us talking about Cloud Atlas. So we should chat about that one at least.
Yeah, I love movies. I think they're a great source of insight and entertainment. I've gotten more into them over the years with my wife as kind of like a shared hobby, like really deep dive into old movies, black and white movies, non-American movies.
Oh hell yeah,
it's good stuff. And I think it's a good hobby. Especially if you're like me, you're more of a stay-at-home person. I mean, I'll leave the house occasionally, but I really like the confines of my home. So the pandemic didn't help that, but
I'm increasingly becoming that kind of person as chronic illnesses catch up with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
I mean, outside is great. Don't get me wrong. Big fan. 2 thumbs up for outside and other human beings, like face to face, but also a big fan of inside.
Word. Yeah, so that was a great overview, and I'm also really excited to see the Egoism Mutual Exchange go up. I'm pretty heavily influenced by Egoism, which, is always a tough thing to disentangle from its various supporters and detractors.
Yes, it was a bit of it was more challenging than the other mutual exchanges to kind of write an even-handed introduction to, because of that. So I hope I did a good job. Maybe we'll talk about egoism as well. It's I don't know how many essays we have exactly yet, but we haven't, to say the least, a variety of perspectives on egoism, even among the pro-egoism crowd. So it'll be fun to see those kind of hashed out. I hope it'll be fun.
Yeah. I mean, as is only proper, right? Like that's
oh yes,
definitely expected. We can definitely get more into egoism at some point. I do kind of want to circle back. One thing I wanted to make sure we talked about was that chapter you mentioned, the 2 Cheers for Rothbardianism in the Routledge Handbook on Anarchy and Anarchist Thought.
Yeah.
So I think you're one of the few remaining Rothbardians, I think, here at the center.
There's dozens of us.
Right.
No, there's barely a dozen people at the center, I would say, but like full-time coordinators. But right. No, I think the sense in which I'm a Rothbardian, I think, would be shared by Jason Bias, who's still part of the center. I don't remember the last time he contributed, but he's an honorary member in my mind. Not sure what the official status of him is. And then Roderick Long, also obviously founder, involved in the founding of the center, I think would sign on to my kind of eccentric Rothbardianism. Maybe that's what I should have called the chapter. I don't know. I think 2/3 is fine, because there are definitely stuff of his that obviously I want to just like throw away into the trash bin and never like have to consider or look at again. But I don't know. Did you have a specific question about the chapter, or did you want me to just kind of give listeners the gist of?
It's probably best to just give folks the gist if you can. Yeah.
So, so I'm sure most folks have heard of Murray Rothbard. If not, he was a 20th century economist, political theorist, historian, even an activist for many years. And depending on what circles you run in, he's either like very famous or very infamous. It's usually one or the other. I like in my chapter try to like say like maybe some sort of golden mean is preferable here. Like some thinkers tend to be like wildly overrated by their fans, like Murray Rothbard, and also underrated by their detractors, like Murray Rothbard. Whereas I think a little more middle ground is possible and desirable with this one, at least with Murray. So my chapter is really just broken down into what from his ideas I want to take and run with, and I think that he contributed that I want to keep, versus the last bit of the chapter, which is what he kind of needs added to his thought quite desperately, I think, to make it fully compelling and kind of coherent. So I mostly just say that Rothbardianism is about, you can look at it broken up into 4 traditions that he kind of brings together and synthesizes in a kind of novel way. He combines like 4 traditions of thought into this nice mix. The first one is Aristotelianism and the tradition of Aristotle. So looking at morality as being mostly about not either calculations or like in consequentialism or strict rules as in deontology, but kind of a third way with looking at virtue and our innate rational capacity to engage with the world, and more importantly to engage with each other for reasoned cooperation on the basis of shared ends, interacting with other people. Rothbard and libertarians in general get a bad rap for being atomistic, and sometimes I think that's true. A little bit of a Robinson Crusoe vision, but most of the time, I think that's a misplaced perception of their ideas. We are a social animal. That's key for Aristotle, and that's key for Rothbard. He thinks that people erroneously leap, and this includes Aristotle, from the fact that we're social animals to the idea that we need a state, that we need some sort of monopoly on force and some sort of centralized system of authority. So Aristotle thinks that and a lot of people do. And Rothbard, says no, like we are social animals. That's where our duties to each other come from. We're rational beings. We can engage in cooperation, or we can engage in force and violence and dominate each other, and that would be unbefitting for a human being, and that would go against our rational capacity and be a form of disrespect to the person that is both the victim of force and the person who's perpetrating it. So Rothbard, from that Aristotelian foundation, and this is the second aspect of his thought, he grounds individualist anarchism in that theory of morality. He draws a lot on Lysander Spooner, Benjamin Tucker, and the 19th century individualist anarchists, and he fully rejects the state and any centralized authority in favor of a totally stateless and free system. And he's really one of the first to kind of ground this idea of total opposition to systematic violence, to the organized banditry of the state, and these Aristotelian ideas about humans as a rational animal. So those are the first two. The third part of his thought, I argue, is liberal class theory. And so when we hear class theory, oftentimes, Marxists have a bit of a monopoly maybe on that kind of rhetoric. But really, class theory long predates Marx. He was drawing on other class theorists, especially the French class theory as well.
Right.
So yeah, Rothbard really draws on the liberal class theorists to develop a theory that explains kind of the class fracturing of society. And instead of Marx's theory, where it seems like the source of that class fracturing is, in some sense, the market or trade, Rothbard instead obviously wants to keep markets and trade, and he locates it, like a lot of the old liberals did, in the state and the political apparatus, the organized monopoly on force that is able to confiscate wealth and value that was created through the free labor of others to the benefit of some. And so he really identifies the mechanism of class fracturing as the state, the monopoly on force, and without that, he thinks that we would avoid that kind of situation. And the last part of his thought that I talk about, which is really the part he's probably most famous for, given that he was actually an economist, is Austrian Economics. And so Austrian Economics is a very comprehensive, sort of wide array of ideas. But generally, it's going to be the views that we can really best understand human action and human interaction and the institutions of social cooperation that have emerged. Less through statistical models that assume things like perfect information and perfect competition and fully rational actors, but instead through analyzing the nature of human action and understanding the nature of trade-offs and scarcity and how these interrelate. And so through that, he kind of builds up a system that suggests that freed markets can be really the most efficient through a system, through the price system, through disseminating information necessary to the production process through these prices. And for Rothbard, Austrian Economics has a bunch of things to say about too that justifies individualist anarchism. Again, all four branches kind of tie together, because obviously here Austrian Economics has a lot to say about the knowledge and incentive problems facing the state, facing centralized authority figures, trying to control or micromanage society in ways that don't account for the knowledge that they don't have, and not owning up to the incentives for totalitarianism or at least some sort of tyranny that comes from the state. And so that's kind of the short rundown on the four traditions that I see Rothbard as kind of bringing together in a novel way. You have Aristotelianism, individualist anarchism, you have liberal class theory, and you also have the Austrian economic stuff. And so the last part of my chapter is more heavily critical of Rothbard, and where Rothbard at best saw really not much to opposing non-state forms of oppression, or at worst was completely amicable to them. I think that non-state forms of oppression are deeply, deeply morally important, just as important as the state. Things like racial supremacy, things like patriarchy, things like ageism, things like heterosexism. So Rothbard really has no use for these things in his system. He's kind of has this monistic focus on the state, and yes, I mean the state is horrible. I'm totally against the state, but he doesn't realize that the same reasons that commit us to opposing the domination and authority and hierarchy of the state commit us to opposing those things everywhere else in society.
Right.
And he also misses how they're overlapping and mutually interlocking structures of oppression much of the time. The state and racial supremacy, obviously the state and patriarchy. Herbert Spencer even talks about their origins of the state and patriarchy being intertwined. So I think the Rothbardianism should commit oneself to having these left-wing, if you might call them, views, or social justice views, whatever you want to call them. But in the chapter, I really draw on a philosopher named Elizabeth Anderson, who argues for relational egalitarianism. And I think that's the tradition in philosophy that really would benefit and be a good fifth branch for Rothbardianism. This relational egalitarianism that opposes domination or deprivation between persons and and wants us all to be on this equal footing, to be heard as discursive beings, to be heard as rational beings. So I think Rothbard offers a lot, but then he misses a lot of the picture when it comes to other things, and we can fill in those gaps with other people's ideas. And so I guess that's the short case for some of Rothbard, but also improving on him where we can.
Yeah, well, thanks for getting so deeply into that. Herbert Spencer's a name I don't hear very often, but a thinker who is influential on me as well. And I think there's a lot of value in having people like you at the center who are willing to look back at thinkers who have been written off, like you said, by a lot of folks, but still have very valuable things to offer. And so, yeah, I never got into Rothbard much myself. But I was heavily influenced by all the influences you mentioned, right? Lysander Spooner, Proudhon, Benjamin Tucker. That's what I was reading. And I guess it's interesting. You talked also about the importance of Rothbard in sort of establishing this individual anarchist position for a lot of people. And we were talking about egoism earlier. Of course, that's where I ground it for myself is within egoism, which I think has been, best developed by some people that also get written off, right? Like Ayn Rand, who, of course, Roderick Longwell has written extensively about the value that's still within Rand's writing, even if you don't go along with every single thing that's written there. And this is part of the reason I'm so excited for this egoism mutual exchange, because egoism is something that people have not looked at for similar reasons that they don't look back at folks like Rothbard as much. But there are scholars who are starting to develop egoism in a postmodern sense, and in a way that I think is going to be a lot more appealing to folks further left. And also just is a fuller description, because one of the problems with egoism is that all you get from Max Stirner is some very, very basic values and outlines. You don't get much fleshed out, especially in terms of looking back to like an ontology, right? When you're talking about Rothbard and a lot of these other philosophers and thinkers in the liberal tradition, or in the, I don't know what I would call it, in the individualist tradition. Stirner is not a liberal, but in the individualist tradition, right? You draw, and a lot of the folks that you're drawing on go back to Aristotle, right? He has fundamental things to say about how the world works. And so egoism was missing kind of an ontological backing for a long time. But scholars like Saul Newman have started to really fill that in. And that's the stuff that I'm most interested in, because it's being developed out of phenomenology, and it's all about, the fact that you fundamentally can't know what it is to be another person. And so in philosophy, of course, this gets talked about as the erotic, right? The thing that draws you but is unknowable. And I find that rings true with regard to, my relations to other people and how I think about what it means to be an individual in community with other individuals. Is there's a connection that we all desire, right? It's fundamental part of being human, to want to be in community with people. But it's also, I think, fundamentally true that you can never know what is in someone else's mind. There is no such thing as perfect communication. There is no such thing as perfect alignment of values. And that's, to me, why, individualism is still very, very important. It's like, if we're going to build any sort of system that works, it has to acknowledge that basic fact about the world.
I think all that's very interesting. I think, the mutual exchange, we'll probably get into this. I did manage to find a couple Saul Newman writings on the Anarchist Library, thankfully, and included them in the background readings when we posted.
Oh, nice.
And I do know, I'm not really well familiar with it. I definitely am not. But yes, it's very intriguing to me, this trying to kind of go back and give this this egoist metaphysics, like you were saying, I mean, to give that background, especially in light of the postmodern thinkers. And it seems like in some areas there's, I mean, again, this is more from the outside looking in. It seems to me like in some areas there's some deep tension maybe between someone like Stirner and someone like Foucault or something. But also seems like many people are interested in like kind of combining and synthesizing them. And who am I to, to roll my eyes at someone being eclectic in their little synthesis of different thinkers? I mean, yeah, I completely agree that that's a really interesting area, and much needed. And I hope we get into it a bit in the mutual exchange. I think, so I want to say one thing, but then I want to come back to the kind of substantive topic you were just discussing, which is the nature of the erotic and kind of social interaction. But the first thing I just wanted to make clear, I guess, was because you touched on it a little bit, was that, yeah, with the chapter and with this whole issue of drawing on thinkers past that were complete idiots or worse in many ways or on certain issues. I think that's the kind of the hand we're dealt, though, in a lot of ways. I'm not interested in hero worship. I'm not interested in ignoring or downplaying any historical thinker's vices. I mean, that is what it is. I can give you a long laundry list of all the terrible things or all the stupid opinions that I found Rothbard saying in my research on him. I mean, I'm sure many of you know the whole unleash the cops thing in his paleo phase, or supporting David Duke in his paleo phase, or earlier discounting feminism when he was aligning with the left and repeating a lot of the talking points that downplayed feminism by saying, well, that's nothing compared to the war, or that's nothing compared to police brutality against black people. And almost, you see this line of thought there. And people like to divide Rothbard neatly into different eras. And that's not what I'm doing. I want accountants. I don't think early Rothbard, late Rothbard is particularly useful. There was many different Rothbards, like many of us. We go through different phases of ideology and contingent alliances throughout our lives sometimes. But I'm criticizing all of when I say 2/3 Rothbard, I mean 2/3 of all Rothbard, not just some era of Rothbard that I have this romanticized vision of in my head. But I get into a lot of the stuff that he says and why it's wrong in the book chapter. And so I'm not interested. And same with someone like Rand, with Ayn Rand, who I talk about in the introduction to the symposium, which is bound to ruffle some feathers. But I know that, and I try to explain, that yeah, it's not, because if you go down this rabbit hole, there's no untainted thinker, right? I mean, we're being terribly anti-Semitic. Anarchism has had here and there a couple bad problems with 19th century anarchists.
I mean, you mentioned Foucault a minute ago, and it's like people forget Foucault and Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir all signed a letter to try and legalize pedophilia. Like,
yes, and that's another one. Yeah, that's another. It's just like, it's interesting because you find, I mean, the way I experience it is like, oftentimes you read thinkers and you're enlivened. Your world is enlarged by them. You think about things more deeply. You think about something you never thought to think about before. Whoever it is, whatever it is, whatever the topic, whatever the thinker. But yeah, and then there's this weird. It's like this disconnect. It's like, wait, if I found so much value in what you said over here, why is what you said or did over here so confoundingly stupid or even evil? What is going on with this? And I think that's just the hand we're dealt. And same certainly 100% with Aristotle going back to him. No shortage of defending things like natural slavery and being horribly sexist in really every area. So
I do think this is less true of Max Stirner than many people think. One of the things I hope this mutual exchange will show people is that what Stirner was doing with the ego and its own was deeply satirical and layered. And so there are, in particular, a lot of passages that get considered anti-Semitic. He is mocking the anti-Semitism of the various states and trying to, basically parrot what they're saying and show how ridiculous it is. Okay. But yeah, a lot of people read that and are like, oh my goodness, that's terrible,
Yes. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion about Stirner. I think that's a very interesting and certainly very plausible perspective on it. The same kind of issue: to what extent is what this thinker is saying anti-Semitic, or is it a product of some sort of irony? It comes up too a little bit with Nietzsche and a little bit with Marx, I think, and thinkers of a similar time period. All as the world is kind of hurtling towards a little bit in terms of rising anti-Semitism. And so, I mean, but and whatever the case may be, whichever of these thinkers was guilty of that or was writing it ironically, whatever the case may be, I mean, I have no doubt that certain thinkers throughout history are actually pretty untainted, I guess. I mean, you can certainly, and that's like neat if the thinker that at first you find tons of value in and stuff, like, and you keep reading and you never actually find that like disconnect moment, and they never seem to say something that was out of bounds or wrong in your view. That, I mean, good for you. That's awesome. I don't think most people experience that. I don't think most great thinkers make it that easy, unfortunately. Right. But I find it so frustrating, and I deal with it so much because of this particular thinker who I wrote the chapter about with Rothbard. And this is maybe even more the case with Rand. I think the people who like them wildly overrate them, and underrate other thinkers before and after them. But the people who dislike them wildly underrate them and don't give them enough. And so I try to be mindful of that perspective, and there are certain thinkers where I'm not really interested in giving the time of day. I saw one or two things by them, and I'm like, I mean, there's only so much time, right? It's scarce. But yeah, I mean, as it turns out, these are a couple that I do find value in, that I like talking about, but also acknowledging their faults, because also that helps give insight into how to be better and where they're mistaken. I think that's a big thing to remember, that they're fans, that you have this inclination to downplay their mistakes, but that you should have the opposite. If you're a fan of them, you should upplay their mistakes in a way. Be like, no, like, I know this sucks. Like I'm not like some bad actor here, like trying to swindle the rest of you. Like, I know this person was anti-Semitic or whatever the case is. I agree with you that, like, in some sense, like, yes, you're unknowable to me. I will never. There's not really something I can conceive of, even with the craziest of science fiction technologies, that would let me like peer into your brain. That is at best a kind of metaphorical statement, it seems to me. But it also seems to me that like there's something really fucking weird going on when we're able to discuss this fact somehow. And I think there's something really mysterious and hard to explain with the mere existence of language and with the mere existence of discourse. You're right. It's not perfect. It's never perfect information into your mind. It's never literally experiencing your subjective experiences. I mean, it's kind of what it is to have a subjective experience. Like that's not going to be shared, but there are some shared things. I mean, and I know you know that. Like I think what you were saying reminded me of like the problem for egoism. It seems is always like, how do we? I feel like most people, especially a lot of anarchist egoists, want to, in some sense, have like this pro-social egoism, and it sounds paradoxical.
I think they're misunderstanding in some ways how to make egoism pro-social, because if you look at it as only a hindrance, right, that I can't see what's in your mind, that's one perspective. But I think a lot of modern egoists, right, actually see it as an opportunity, right? If you can think things that I can't think, together we can think many, many more things.
Right.
And so that's why I love the word erotic for it, right? Because like you said, it is mysterious, it is seductive. There is something about being with other people, and I think it hinges on this fact that we cannot fully know each other. And so there's creation, right, inside each person, but also in the meeting of minds. And yeah, so that's why I find egoism to be very, very pro-social in and of itself, and optimistic, right? I think it has a pretty optimistic view about each individual. And so that's something I also really like to emphasize is, I think that one of the, I don't know where I want to go with this. Knowing yourself is really hard, right? And I think trying to get people to work together in a community there's a certain amount of acceptance. There has to be a certain amount of acceptance that you're going to represent yourself as you are, or as you understand yourself to be, to those other people, right? And that requires a certain amount of confidence and self creativity. And this is why I think individualism, as expressed in egoism, is so very important. Is that people forget how to do that if they're not reminded that you actually have that creativity inside you. So, and that's, of course, that's also where I ground a lot of my ethics, right? Is the destruction of an individual human mind is a complete tragedy that can never be righted, right? Because no other person will ever have the same mind.
Yes, I'm reminded of Emmett Goldman saying I think the human individual is a cosmos in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Not an egoist herself, really, but that line in particular. Yeah, I agree, and I mean, I think we both come from maybe a little different, because egoism is kind of this broad tradition, as we've mentioned. So, but there's so much common ground with the whole reason that we're attracted to it in the first place, as maybe a useful way of thinking about the self and about ethics and about society. I agree. The assertion of the self, the authenticity of the self. I think rightly understood, I think something like pride can be a virtue. I think, like you said, confidence. I mean, I think we often go. To me, it's always kind of trying to balance in some ways two sides of a spectrum, because it's easy to go and take this almost in the direction of, well, you should assert yourself over everyone else, and I think some kind of some readings of Nietzsche and Rand kind of are, and again Stirner. I mean, of all I think of this broad tradition, that's like the way of going wrong with it, and that's what I think also worries people who are like no. I mean, I don't want that. I want equality. I want egalitarianism. I want a universalist ethic. I want something that makes room for all people. And I think that the egoists kind of want most or all those things too, depending on how you cash out those concepts.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of these reconciling and balancing these tensions or these dichotomies with, I mean, yes, pride is a virtue, but arrogance is not, right? Domination is not. So there has to be built into the self, I think, some like acknowledgement and some and more, and really more than acknowledgement, like you said, a respect and even an appreciation, right, for another mind. Like there has to be, it emerges naturally out, I think, of any good egoism, that you recognize, not perfectly, but some elements of what's going on in you in another lump of matter over there, and it's like, okay, well, that gives us some kind of connection or some equal footing in a sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I see it as I see it as central to understanding what other individuals are. Is once you understand, the power of your own individuality, the flip side of that should be to recognize and respect other individuals. One of the problems is that there are a lot of people who call themselves egoists or Stirnerites, who do the same thing as you're talking about, with Rand, where they'll take the absolute worst interpretation and run with it. And I still think that those are probably, the numerical majority of egoists who exist right now, which is really unfortunate. But there was something else I wanted to say about egoism.
No, that is unfortunate. I mean, on my side, with finding some of the Rand flavored egoism a little more attractive than the Stirner flavored. Well, I really have nothing in common with the average Randian. Obviously, I take Rand. I like a lot of her like foundational ideas and even her writing, but I take it. I end up in this kind of wildly different area and different arena than her in some major ways. Her and her followers, some major ways. Obviously, I'm an anarchist. I'm a left libertarian. So I can't find much common ground either with. But in terms of my own thoughts about how things fit together, hey, I think back a lot to the ideas that she offered.
Well, I can't remember what else I was going to say, so we can move on. I have some other like less theory questions, just kind of about life and culture and stuff.
Questions about life.
Yeah. So the first is, since we're on a podcast, I'm curious, what podcasts do you listen to when you're not, on them?
So I listen to Mutual Exchange. Obviously, almost every episode has a guest that I'm probably going to be pretty interested in. I'm a really big fan of Free Thoughts, the libertarianism.org podcast. I've been on that one, but I've watched it or listened to it for years, and I really like the Aaron Powell and Trevor Burrus's kind of interviewing style, and also their Pop and Lock podcast now about like TV and movies too, as well, is really fun. I also really love the Non-Serviam podcast. I guess I've been on that one too. I guess a lot of the podcasts I've just listened to for years at some point, since I kind of like know the people who run them. But yeah, I think like I don't listen to many podcasts, but my own little bubble of ideas, of weird fringe and niche and eclectic ideas that I like, tend to be best represented, I think, by these few podcasts. I also really like Tyler Cowen's podcast, Conversations with Tyler, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Tyler Cowen has tons of views that I'm really not a fan of, or at least insofar as I can even know his views, because I know he's always got the Straussian bullshit going on. So sometimes I'm not even sure what he really thinks. But I think he's quite an interesting and intriguing feller, and I get a lot from listening to his interviews. I think he's like a pretty fantastic interviewer. And he has like people of all sorts of backgrounds on. So that's like that's a good one to like get out of your bubble. Like we tend to, it's like these thinkers I know or I've heard of or that I want to get into or that have roughly similar worldviews as mine, represented by these few podcasts I listen to a lot. But you need some that are like the opposite, right? That get you out of that. And so, I never know what kind of folks that Tyler's going to have on, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah,
I would say.
I stopped listening to that one, and maybe I should go back to it. Because I've gotten very into the whole like anti-fascist podcast space.
Yeah.
Behind the Bastards, all the shows in that production line. And it is a little too much sometimes, to have that in your mind all the time. I should go back and listen to some of the conversations with Tyler.
Oh, they're fun. They're wildly different than anti-fascist podcast space for sure. But that can be good, and every once in a while. I also just recently started, and this is like again kind of wildly different, but I just recently started listening to the podcast created by the Always Sunny in Philadelphia people. Do you watch this show?
Yeah.
Do you know this, that they started a podcast? The three creators, the three creator writers, Dennis and Mac and Charlie. So they're on the podcast, and they go episode by episode from the show, starting at the first episode. And the show's been on for like 15 years, so they have a ton to go through. And I'm a fan of Always Sunny, and again, I don't listen to many podcasts, but this one I just started listening to. Like now, it comes out every few days, and I listen to it with my wife, and it's very funny. I like Always Sunny. I think it's very good satire, and seeing like peeking behind the curtain at the kind of weird, funny individuals behind that show is quite entertaining. So
I'm definitely going to have to listen to that, because I live in Philadelphia right now.
Yes, that's right.
I have for a minute, and it's I love that show. I think I love it even more now that I live in Philly.
Yeah, how accurate is that? Is it Always Sunny in Philly, Alex?
Well, it's relatively
sunny. That wouldn't have been as catchy of a title.
Right.
It's relatively sunny in Philadelphia. That would be, yeah.
No, I really love that show. I think I've seen every episode, so I'll have to definitely check out that podcast. I've been listening to somewhat similar, just kind of jokey show, Dark Air with Terry Carnation. And so that's Rainn Wilson from The Office. He plays Dwight.
Oh.
Yeah, and so he's Terry Carnation, who's like a late night UFO AM radio guy.
So this is like he plays like a character on this podcast.
Yeah. There's a lot of like fourth wall breaking and stuff like that, but it's cool. It's fun. I had fun with it.
I like The Office. Cut that. No.
We hate The Office. No, it's funny. I made my wife watch it, and
what, The Office or the podcast?
The Office.
The American Office.
The American Office.
Okay.
I was expecting her to like the funny parts and like, I don't know, generally not like it. But she got really into the whole like Pam and Jim story.
Oh, I envy your wife because I mean it's been
Me
like
too.
10 or 15 years, but that's, I mean, that was a great, man, will they or won't they rom-com. That's like platonic ideal of that trope.
Yeah, it was very funny. She's very much not a rom-com person, and I was like, "What do you mean? You like this?"
That is pretty funny. Well,
she's a horror movie aficionado, so that's
a what?
Horror movie.
Oh, horror.
Aficionado.
Oh yeah, that's so different. Well, as we were saying, the creativity and unexpectedness of another mind.
Mm-hmm.
Always fun when I mean, if I can't think of anything analogous off to, or I guess kind of always. My wife hasn't. She'll like watch Always Sunny with me, but like she doesn't love it. I don't think her sense of humor is as cynical as mine sometimes, and that show is like really fucking cynical, like overbearingly so. But then she really liked I told her do you want to listen to the podcast? And she was like, okay, sure. And she loves it. I think she likes it more than the show. Like they're funnier just bullshitting for 45 minutes than as the sitcom. But
maybe it's
when people surprise you with what they like or defy your expectations.
Yeah.
I think you know them so well. Then.
I mean, it also might, there's a decent amount of like gross out humor on the show, right?
Sure. I mean, well, I think there's like no shortage of things to dislike about It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. There's like, it makes it very easy to just, I'm not going to watch this dumb shit. I'm just going to change the channel. But
yeah, I still quote to people sometimes, can I offer you an egg in this trying time?
That show has so many great quotable lines. I think it's good. I think it's like it does satire good. I think that's why it puts off people. Like at first you're not sure like how, a lot of shows you root for the characters. I feel like it's kind of the expectation. And this show is not at all. You're not at all supposed to be rooting for these terrible people. So
right. Well, so we can talk more about pop culture stuff in a minute. I did also, though, want to just go back a little bit, and folks may not realize that you and I go all the way back to being like Students for Liberty student leaders.
Yeah, we were students for liberty, literally.
Yeah.
How long have you been friends? Like, what year is it? 2022.
2022.
Okay, probably like 7 years.
Yeah, and so that's, I don't know if people know that you were behind the Oklahoma Anarchism Conference and...
I don't know, behind, I mean, I've never lived in Oklahoma. I get lumped in with them sometimes, but I never fucking lived there. I've only been there like once or twice for those conferences. I spoke at one. Oh no, I did. It's so long ago. I think I did co-organize with our friend Cooper at one of those conferences. Yes.
That's got to be it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good times.
You're just an honorary Oklahoman now.
Yeah, I guess so. That's fine. It's like a nice, like when I was there, it's very like suburbs, like not much going on. At least wherever I went. There's also this awesome action figure museum that me and Kelly, my wife, stopped at because we drove from Houston, I think, to Oklahoma for that. And this museum had thousands of for over decades. And I've never seen an action figure museum.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Pretty niche topic. I like action figures. I don't really collect them anymore. When I was a kid, I did. So I was like, oh, this is fucking cool. I guess that was pretty lame. Now that I'm saying it out loud. But.
No, I mean, I think it's cool. I don't know. Do you want to talk about Batman?
Oh God, no, we don't have to. I mean, I don't. I don't know how much question when people talk to me. Okay, Corey, do you want to talk? Like, how much of this conversation do you want to spend on Batman? Let's bookmark that part of the conversation. No, nah. I mean, I don't think our viewers like Batman. That's fine. I don't like him a lot of the time. So we don't need to talk. He's getting like his 10th movie in however many years. I think enough people have been talking about Batman, maybe. Let me ask you, Alex, what are your thoughts on the fictional children's character, Batman?
I actually love Batman as well.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. I got a greatest Batman stories ever told thick book of comics.
Oh, nice.
My grandfather as a child.
Oh, that's a nice memory.
I didn't really read other comics, but I did read that one. And so yeah, I had a lot of love for Batman, both because he didn't have superpowers, right? That was always the cool thing.
Yes.
It's like, this is just a guy deciding to like do things.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that was a big part of it. And then also just like, I don't know, it's always been grittier than the other superhero stories. And so that's always very much appealed to me.
I was always attracted because it's just like the ultimate power is the human mind, right? That's what he's about. So even as a little kid, that's appealing. But the grittiness, there's so much grittiness now. I used to be like, yeah, give me fucking gritty, like hell yeah. And then now I'm like, ugh, give me Joel Schumacher.
Right. Give me something hopeful.
Give me bat nipples and the bat credit card and shark repellent. I mean,
yeah, actually, I did watch all that old stuff too. I'm now trying to remember why and how.
Nice.
We just didn't have like new shows, I guess. Like my parents had us watching that and like the old Muppet Show and like.
So this is what you watch growing up: the Adam West Batman, the Muppet Show.
What
else? Did you watch the Honeymooners, Alex? Did you? The
I don't think so. We did watch I watched the Flintstones.
Well, yeah, classic.
I don't know why. Maybe this is why I feel like such an old man. Is I was shown like
you were raised on 60s TV.
I was. I really was.
You are functionally, like culturally, you're in your 60s, Alex. How does that make you feel?
Oh, it explains a lot, actually.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, it explains a lot. I've had a hard time getting used to using Discord, for instance.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to actually. I feel like you bugged me for months to get on the C4SS Discord for the coordinators.
I did.
Yeah, for the coordinators. So that all that was me just being like, fucking no, I don't want to have to learn another thing. But then I had to because I can't be that assertive, and I have to go with the crowd sometimes.
Yeah, we have younger people on the team now, and that's.
Yes. Yeah. It's not bad. In fact, I used it for, I didn't mention this in like what I do segment, which is weird because I guess I just forgot, but no, I use it for, the virtual reading group I'm doing with a philosopher named Dr. Gregory Sadler on the ancient Roman philosopher Seneca, a Stoic. And so we're meeting Monday nights, over Zoom to talk about his writings, but I've been using Discord for additional discussion about the writings, and Discord's fine, I guess. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't use TikTok. I'm not gonna. No. Sometimes my wife shows me some dance or some new thing on TikTok, and I'm like, I don't get this.
Yeah, I can't figure it out either.
God, man, are we alienating the Zoomers listening? How many Zoomers are listening?
I want to assure people we do have younger folks on the team.
Oh yeah, no, I feel like an old man. You probably do too. Like we're like there's like a new generation of left market anarchists that are crazy, and I'm like, and I see them on Twitter. And
that's something we can talk about too. Is like, how excited are you that it's not just like a dozen of us anymore?
Oh, I'm scared, but I'm very excited. No, it's weird. It's like your in-group is getting bigger and like you don't know everyone in it necessarily. One time I heard Roderick Long describe the American libertarian movement this way, as being in the 50s, all of it could fit in Rothbard's living room in Manhattan or Brooklyn. And by now, obviously, it's thousands of people. Now, we haven't exactly made those strides, us left market anarchists. But it's nice to see younger people getting into that stuff and being like, oh, like this is like, it's not, at least maybe when I die, like these ideas will live on, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, we'd be a tight fit in a Brooklyn apartment at this point.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. Actually, so kind of looking forward, I wanted to ask at some point, what you're looking forward to going into hosting. What are you most excited about for the show? What are you looking forward to?
Well, maybe this is fitting for the egoism thing. I tend to think of a lot of this stuff kind of selfishly, like it's hard to like judge the value of what you're doing on like a macro scale of like we were just talking about, like like you really don't have much control over whether the ideas that you happen to like will live on that much after you die or not. But you do have control over like what activities you're engaged in on a day-to-day basis. And if you like talking and thinking about those ideas, then hey, then why not do that? So I mean, I'm just very interested in hearing about people's worldviews, challenging, I suppose, people's worldviews. I think any good interview would have a little bit of pushback, right? A little bit of. So yeah, I really liked I've never done interviewing except for that interview with Gary Chartier and Charles Johnson, and it was quite enjoyable to kind of pick their brains about that work. So I really like picking people's brains. You probably know that, when we hang out in person, I mean, a little bit tend towards that. I try to control myself sometimes. I don't want to be like too Socratic and like too assertive and like alienate the person I'm talking to. Sometimes I do that, I think, but I like to just kind of tease out like what people's attitudes and worldview is. And so podcast format seems as good for that as any other.
Yeah. No, and I like that we have, I think we've done fairly well, having people on who are close enough that we can talk to, but, where there is some pushback and discussion and working things out, right? I do feel like every time I walk out of an interview for this show, I've learned something or thought about something in a way that I otherwise wouldn't have.
Yes.
I think the hardest one I did was with Gus DeZerga on democracy as a spontaneous order.
Okay.
Because again, I'm an egoist, right? I don't care about democracy.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it made me think about it in different ways.
I totally agree. I think you've done a great job with the hosting that you've done. I think Zach did a great job when he was running things. I think it's a good, like, if you don't walk away from the podcast having thought, well, I learned something, or that was an interesting little exchange. Like, neither did the viewer, probably. Like, that's a good, like, if you're not engaged or if you're not interested, like, so you have to, and like you said, you have to find the middle ground between someone with like wildly different views, where it's like maybe hard to have an in-depth discussion, versus someone who you just agree with on everything. Like that, both of those can be pretty boring and unproductive. So,
right,
like, really important.
Yeah, we avoided that in the one I did with Nathan, mostly on the basis of his just absolutely extensive historical accounting, which was very, horrifying things to learn, but quite a lot.
Yeah, Nathan, hard to disagree with that person.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to disagree.
Actually, here's a kind of related question. Do you have a favorite episode of MER that we've done so far?
I feel like I'm like the ones that. Well, I do like everything with Nathan. I really did enjoy the one. It was a while ago that Zach did with Roderick Long, that he had Roger on. I feel like I'm biased. I'm just picking the one with Roderick because I like Roderick Long. But they talked about their Roderick's co-edited book on social power, which is like an anthology of essays about class theory and like liberal class theory, as I was kind of referencing at the beginning of the discussion. And Zach, I like Zach. Whenever I talk to Zach, he pushes back. I mean, we disagree on lots of things, and I think, especially on that issue of class theory, Zach was able to like really give these nuanced and sophisticated, because I think part of Zach is really sympathetic to those views, but then also he's got the criticisms in the back of his mind, and he was able to like push on. I'm like, okay, well, how, like, where is this theory inadequate, or where is this like not really supported or insufficient in some way? And so I often think about that interview, however long ago that was.
Yeah, that was a really good one. And it's kind of similar. I think my favorite is the one he did earlier this year with Jesse Spafford on the libertarian case against property rights.
Yes, Jesse has wild views, but that was kind of intriguing.
Yeah, and it's similar to what we were talking about earlier, being someone who can take thinkers who a lot of people would think have a certain, there's only so much to glean from them, and look at them in new ways and find new arguments and combine them in different ways. And so, yeah, that one was really cool too, of like, what can we, if we take various libertarian scholars at their word, what does that actually say about property rights? So
Right.
yeah, I love that one.
No, yes, I like Jesse's. I was on like a virtual APA panel with Jesse last year, I think, and some others, like Jason and I think Nathan and yeah, Jesse. He on those panels. He always feels like the token social anarchist. Like we're, but it's but man, I mean that's quite like very counterintuitive to his arguments. I always find, but you're not. It doesn't like dawn on you right away why it's wrong or if it's wrong. But like it's not. There's not always an immediate like but what about? So I find I usually disagree with Jesse. I think, but I find his stuff pretty interesting from what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I had the same experience listening to that interview and going, well, I don't agree, but I don't know why I don't agree when you lay it out like that.
And that can be like fun. I mean, it's challenging, but
yeah.
So maybe I just looked at how long we've been talking, and that does not feel like that. But we can switch to interview rules a little bit if you want. And
sure.
because there is one thing that we were talking about it very briefly before we start recording, but that I am curious about. And so this is your shift from, or at least from what I understand, a shift from a kind of more Christian informed kind of spiritualism and a Christian pacifism, a shift from that to something grounded more in the Jewish tradition. And that's a shift. So I think it's kind of interesting, and I just wanted to maybe hear about that train of thought. About what
totally. Yeah. So I did talk to Joel Williamson on Non-Servium about this a little bit. Mostly, we were talking about the intersection of religion and egoism, right? Because it's not an intersection that a lot of egoists explore.
Yeah.
I'm pretty unique. So yeah, we were mostly talking about it from that perspective, but I got a little bit into it with him as well in that interview. But yeah, I was telling you earlier, the short version of the story is that Christian pacifism just did not work for me anymore. So a little background on that. I was raised Presbyterian, and I was raised in a church that was very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very academic. Our pastor or minister rather had an econ degree, actually. He had a BS in economics. Yeah, so I had a really weird kind of upbringing. And then we later had ministers come on who were pro-LGBT. There are 2 presbyteries in the U.S., and the one that my church was part of voted to legalize gay marriage within the church. And there were lots and lots of very intense theological discussions about that.
Okay.
And I think that's probably where I got very interested in theology and theological philosophy. And so I read Soren Kierkegaard very early, and Thomas Aquinas and Augustine. And for a while, that was probably what I was most interested in, right? Was, philosophy coming out of theology. And I still consider Soren Kierkegaard to be a huge, huge influence. For those who aren't familiar, he's often considered the first existentialist. He has a Christian existentialism that predates Sartre by, I think, 200 years. I would have to check. It's either that or like 150. But yeah, so he comes around Christianity in some very, very interesting ways, particularly in Fear and Trembling. So that's a tract that is about it's about the binding of Isaac, right? So that's when Abraham takes Isaac up the mountain and prepares to like sacrifice him. And so I think one of the coolest things that Kierkegaard does in Fear and Trembling is basically what it is a retelling of the story in several different ways, several different perspectives, several different understandings. And that was what first got me thinking about how I understand spirituality and theology, and how diverse one's understanding of that can be. So, sorry, this is probably going to be pretty long.
This is interesting. No, I mean, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. So at that point, I started looking into different Christian sects and trying to understand, which ones were most historically grounded, which ones were, engaged with philosophy to the extent that I wanted them to be. And I came up pretty short. I eventually started going to Friends meetings. So those are Quakers. And Quakers have a very egalitarian system. There are no ministers. Everyone is considered a minister. They've historically been very impactful, or very influential rather, in parts of the U.S., right? To the extent where, so here in Pennsylvania, I got married in what is called the Quaker style, which is that my wife and I married each other with no officiant. And that's because Quakers are not allowed to swear oaths, because they consider swearing an oath to the state or to someone other than God to be blasphemous. So yeah, Quakers, very radical, extremely pacifist. And so, yeah, when I was involved with the Friends, they still do a whole lot of anti-war activism, a whole lot of racial justice activism, increasingly. And so, yeah, it was really, really good to be a part of that community, and I got to do some really, I think, impactful things. So, in particular, there's a program called Alternatives to Violence that they run, and it operates both inside of and outside of prisons. And one of the things I really loved about it is that folks on the inside and on the outside have equal ability to sort of get trained as trainers or trainers and kind of move up and run things on their own. And so I really appreciated, folks who would give agency to people who are incarcerated. So yeah, that's kind of where I was up until about 2016. And some things started happening in 2016 that started to put my physical safety in risk more often. And I think particularly, being on the streets on Inauguration Day and seeing the sheer level of force that was being brought out to deal with the protests really, really got me thinking about what it means to, honor yourself and the people you care about, right? And so, remember, this is all related as well to the things I was saying about egoism earlier, where, the individual human mind is what the universe is made of. That is the most fundamentally important thing to preserve. And so I started thinking about, is it proper to not use force to protect myself, right? This turning the other cheek actually starts to seem kind of disrespectful of life when it comes to protecting your own life and the lives of people you care about. And so I started studying theology again. And at the time, I had met my wife, who did her undergraduate in theology, specifically around Jewish theology, and was at the time pursuing a PhD in philosophy. And so she started turning me on to, some other thinkers. Martin Buber is a big one, as well as some current Jewish anarchists. So people who are alive and writing today, like Cindy Milstein. And I did a lot of reflection on what I think about violence. And one of the things that came out of that is my piece that's in the Fighting Fascism Mutual Exchange, the meditation on violence. So yeah, that kind of sums up the reflection that I did and the feelings that I was having about what does it mean to actually respect human life. And so, yeah, my decision to convert to Judaism, which I started doing several years ago, and which, I'm not gonna predict an end date, because I'm not great about doing bureaucratic things. But it will happen one day or another. I will get through all the steps. But yeah. So that, yeah.
No, I was just say I liked your. I remember your piece, Meditation on Violence. Sometimes I post it to the social media. I like that piece.
Oh, nice.
I like that.
Yeah. So that was a big part of the impetus, was just rethinking pacifism. But it was also starting my relationship with my wife, who is a scholar of Jewish thought to some extent. And just, one of the Christians will hate me for this, but one of the last things I did is I went back and read the Gospel in Brief by, oh my God, why is my brain blanking on this? Anarchist guy. Tolstoy, I'm sorry. Tolstoy. So yeah, Leo Tolstoy's The Gospel in Brief was the last thing I read to kind of like see if there was anything left for me in Christianity. And I got to the end thinking, Jesus is such a whiny bitch. Like I just couldn't, and this is, if you're not familiar, The Gospel in Brief is a edited version of the Gospel written by Leo Tolstoy with the intention of showing people how Christians should be anarchists, right? So it's highlighting the anarchist parts of Christianity, and even that, yeah, I got to the end and I was just like, yeah, I can't do it anymore.
Do you think that even that the very notion of that synthesis of Christian anarchism is a little unstable in your mind because of the Christian impetus to pacifism not being, amenable to the anarchism and the anarchist emphasis on like the self and like you said, like that's like turning their cheek, like now you think of that as like that's like a denigration of the self.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on what sort of anarchist you are, right? So folks who are more liberal anarchists, right? I think that makes total sense, right?
If what do you? I have to ask what you mean by that. I might count as that. I might not.
Yeah, you might. I don't know exactly how I would define it.
Okay. As opposed to what liberal anarchist versus illiberal anarchist. What is the other? Well, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, I've never been religious. I've never found the view that you should just let yourself be hurt or harmed or aggressed against or dominated. I've never found that view compelling. I've found some things to do with Christian anarchism and pacifism and just Christianity more broadly compelling and interesting. Yes. And I think Christian anarchism is really intriguing, but I totally agree with you about, and maybe that's because we both have a little bit of that egoism tinge that this view that you basically should not stand up for yourself.
Yeah, as best I can understand it, right? And this is what I get into in that meditation on violence is I do think they're right that there is some sort of psychological influence on the self by doing violence, right? Right. And I think it's similar to this idea within anarchism that I think is very important, which is that you can't use tools of domination to end domination, right?
Absolutely.
And so a lot of pacifists will say, right, like you can't use violence to end violence.
Right.
But I think it needs to be, at this point, at least a parallel approach,
I think that statement, in one sense, I completely agree with it in terms of like a broad macroscopic view. Like I don't see that in terms of transformative social relations. I don't see how. I think that is the anarchist point, that you can't tear down the master's house with the master's tools. But in a different sense, I think it's totally wrong, because in an individual instance, in an interaction with another person or another group of persons, if violence can be used defensively, and so if the violence that you're using is truly defensive and is only aimed at restoring the conditions of nonviolence, if the point of your violence is merely, if all you have in your purview is the conditions of nonviolence and peace that had existed prior to the other party's violence, that to me is not only justified but obligatory. I really think that not doing so, whether, I mean, it could be disrespectful to yourself or another party that you could protect from violence, that to me is not using the master's tools to destroy the master's house. That's different to me, and I think that's
and this is something that you get expressed in at least contemporary Jewish anarchism, right? Is like, no, you actually have an obligation to fight back.
Right.
So yeah, that sits a lot better with me. And there's also there's a huge history of Yiddish anarchism, like specifically Yiddish anarchism that
Right.
you know has been largely lost, and there's a lot of people working really hard to reestablish that right now. And so that's really exciting to me, is getting to have a lot of these voices retranslated and brought back into the fold, and really get to engage with them again, because some of them are really far, far ahead of their time.
Hmm.
Um, and
Interesting.
I find a lot of inspiration both from the things that seem very prescient and the things that seem very out of place with our modern world. So there's an idea within Yiddish anarchism of Doigheit, or here-ness, and that basically means that you don't flee. No matter what happens, you stay and fight for your community. Um,
Hmm.
and that was an impactful thought in my decision to come back to the United States. I left the U.S. in
Right.
2017, um, and was only gone for about 6 months, and then you know I got convinced that I actually did need to come back and see it through.
Hmm. Well, I have a couple questions. I'm just curious. So your wife is a scholar of Judaism. Is she also Jewish?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. She
okay.
is also a convert, but she
Also a
converted.
convert to Judaism. Okay.
Yeah.
It's very funny. It's interesting because I'm ethnically Jewish. I guess my mother is Jewish, my family, but I've never uh, really been interested in. I have a kind of a weird relationship to it, but I've never really practiced it or been engaged in that. So it's kind of
Well,
fascinating.
I think it makes it easier, right, when you don't have family stuff tied up in it. Um,
Maybe.
Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, no, that's actually an interesting. That could be true. It's yeah. I also have found to me the when I read Christian literature compared to Jewish literature, or trying to contrast the kind of worldviews, I've always found the Jewish one much more amenable to my views. Maybe in part because of my, if you want to call it, egoism. I mean, the the Jewish emphasis on earthly life, on the material world, on experiencing earthly existence, and then the consequential rejection of pacifism. I think those are kind of bound up, and I find both
Mhm.
of those very compelling as compared to Christianity's kind of um, neglect of the physical embodiment of the self, and kind
Right.
of deferral to some kind of afterlife. Um, I'd rather not have that, and properly appreciate and honor and respect the our actual embodied existence here and now. I find that far more compelling in terms of a philosophy.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, probably, obviously. But I also think it has something to do with um, the quality of historical scholarship,
Mm.
in part because of centralizing efforts, right, made by the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And, I think there's a lot more discussion and variety of thought
Okay.
preserved in Jewish theology too.
Oh,
Um,
sure. I mean, we're painting with such broad strokes over thousands of years of human life.
right.
That's a very good point.
But
Now,
I do think the Council of Nicaea and what happens with the church really limited Christian
mm,
scholarship in ways that I don't know it'll ever recover from.
mm.
But
I'm curious if you um, now I've gone to a couple of Quaker meetings. I was also very much liked their kind of anarchist
mm,
structure and vibe. I really really like that as opposed to most of my other interactions with organized religion. Now, but isn't I'm this is kind of an aside, but isn't part of their wedding ceremony you because part of the services was everyone sits in silence for an hour, at least for the ones that I went to. So, but part of their wedding ceremony isn't that you have to stare in the eyes of your partner for a long time? Did you do that part too?
No. So when
Okay.
I say we got married in the Quaker style, I mean the state of Pennsylvania has an option to not
Oh,
have an officiant because they're so
oh,
influenced by Quaker practices. We didn't pay
oh,
an extra fee to do it that way, but
oh, that sucks. Wow. Well, fuck that. But that's fascinating. I did not at all grasp that that's what you're.
yeah. If you pay
That's
them
interesting
$100,
because
you
quick.
don't have to get state married.
Wow, that's fascinating. We should have moved. I mean, my wife and I had to get legally married here down in Florida, but then we just did that at the courthouse, like in our normal clothes, and then we did the ceremony without any sort of officiant or really religious aspect.
Mm.
So that's really cool that you were able to. They had to extort you one last time, but yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's gross that they make you pay for it, but it was cool to not have to have, you know,
that is
any
very cool.
state officiant.
That's very cool because I mean, I view it as the state is getting into this thing that is good and romantic in a deeper sense and kind of sacred in its own way and we're literally forced to get the state involved. It's a bit frustrating.
Right.
I'm curious if on the question of pacifism and Judaism and the appropriateness of violence, do you worry though with okay, on the one hand, going too far in one direction is just always turning the other cheek. But I feel like it's very easy to go too far in the other direction with engaging in retribution or violence beyond just the violence necessary to restore nonviolence.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this again is why I wrote that whole piece. Is
Yeah.
I also saw, people going too far the other direction. Within anti-fascist circles I was in, right, saying things like, "Oh, they did this, we should do this back," or "They're going after journalists, we should too," or things like that, which were I thought wildly inappropriate.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I think there's an effect there, and there's also, I mean, there is a psychological effect, and so I am someone who has had to defend myself a number of times, and I now am diagnosed with OCD, and I don't think that happens just because I was predisposed to it. There's actually more research now into whether or not it's just a form of PTSD.
Okay.
And it does, I think, affect the way that you think about things. And it also has an impact on group dynamics. Um, and one of the ways it does that is that when you experience violence with people, first of all, there's trauma bonding. And so you don't regulate your relationships with those people the way that you normally would. And second of all, it creates an expectation of violence within the group. And so this is why you see, the more violent groups of anarchists or communists or whatever start to get into these really fucked up culty relationships. I think it has a lot to do with experiencing violence together and doing violence together, even if it's defensive. So I think that while there are times where there is absolutely no other answer, it's really important to, to maintain the framework of this is only the option when all other options are exhausted, and to remember that like de-escalation is always the best choice. Um, so yeah, it's something I worry about quite a lot, especially with, one of the trends we've been seeing lately. We were talking about how exciting it is to have so many more, left libertarians, market anarchists, anarchists in general, in Gen Z, and I'm really excited about that. But I'm also very worried that there's a lot of people who don't seem to know the difference yet between Stalinism or anarchism or Maoism or Leninism or what have you. And I do see a lot of these younger folks getting talked into this kind of tanky ultra violence let's kill them all vibe. And yeah, I don't like that. I don't think that's good at all. It scares me a lot.
Yeah, that's kind of the that's not the ideal scenario that you want to go in, to say the least. That's I'm in a similar position to you. I think it's a very difficult middle ground to find and to adjudicate, kind of between pitfalls of both avoiding violence completely or glorifying it and reproducing it. It's
And I mean,
hard to keep your eye on both, and people like to just go one or the other, but that's
I think one of the subtle things people don't think about enough is glorifying it in the sense of lifting up the most violent people in our networks, which even if the violence they're doing is good, there's, I think, within leftist circles still this desire to be the tough guy, to lift up tough guys, and to, kind of worship the violence a little bit. And yeah, I get very, very worried about that.
Yeah.
No machismo here, please.
No. Yeah,
it's funny. I was listening to something with Che Guevara's daughter was on some show that I listened to. I don't even remember which one. But they were talking about like Che's legacy and like, I think they asked her about like some of the shitty things he did around like LGBT rights and, being an anti-feminist. Yeah. And she was kind of really uplifting the whole, like he was a man's man, like this Cuban machismo stuff. And I was like, what on earth?
That's terrible.
Well, I think specifically what she said is he was just concerned about protecting us. And I was like, oh my God.
That sucks.
That's gross.
Yeah. It's so strange how, I mean, wherever you go, the logic of violence can be reproduced. It's frustrating. That's kind of reprehensible.
Yeah. Who do you wish, are there big figures you see people lifting up now that you wish they wouldn't?
Huh. I don't know. I mean, I feel like for me and like the circles I run in, like we don't like, C4SS does not really fuck around with ever uplifting state leaders, right. People who have actually run the organized mechanism of violence in prisons and police, whether they're U.S. presidents or Che or Mao or I don't know. I mean, I live in America, and the American libertarian movement sometimes is entirely like way insufficiently anti-American politicians. So maybe that's, but then no, I see the same thing you do with, because I also run in left-wing circles, and it is easy to romanticize a Che. I mean, Che in particular, I would say, but also others.
Right.
Lenin.
Well, whenever that picture of Stalin as a young man came out, I feel like that was a real. I will not deny he's cute. Like, it's physically attractive, yes, but.
Yeah, that's the.
Massmino is hot too. Come on.
Yeah, it's funny because I think someone who is like supremely guilty of this, but also in a strangely consistent way, like not in a like, oh, I only like my preferred leaders, like who are my preferred charismatic demagogues, but Rothbard in private writings, which only came out later, would heavily praise and look to Lenin, he and Che, and even in a couple passages Hitler, because of their charismatic movement building abilities.
That's
and it is. I mean, he famously wrote. I think Rothbard wrote a obituary for Che, which has always been public. He wrote that, and that was when he was allying with the New Left. And his obituary for Che is reprehensible, and he feeds into the exact same kind of pitfalls that tankies fall into, that some of the left falls into, some of the American libertarians opposing U.S. empire rightfully, but then wrongfully fall into. a lot of that stuff. But then in a private kind of series of essays on strategy that he wrote, he delves further into how like that's one thing I think that Rothbard was like really wrong about, and is like hilariously illustrative of his life and continued cycle of burning bridges, forming alliances, burning bridges, forming alliances. He looked to these folks, especially Lenin, in those essays, to that's how you build a movement, and that's what we have to do, but with not Lenin's ideas, with my ideas. Um and I couldn't disagree more. I think it's we don't have to get into a whole debate about Leninism, but wildly counterproductive, and has many dangerous pitfalls, from violence to uplifting and hero worshiping, terrible people, to putting your cards in with some sort of contingent state apparatus that you hope to maybe direct towards good ends. Yeah, so it's I that stuff is really infuriating to me. I don't see why we need to look to any of them. I think the phrase "most great men in history are not great, but are in fact horrible." I think that whole idea is basically true, and I try to keep that in mind. I don't think. I mean, it's not there aren't exceptions, but that's for the most part. That's like a better like default than just like going around like, oh, okay, yeah, this person, let's just uplift them and their charisma and ignore the evils they did. It's horrible.
Yeah, well, and I think it's interesting from another angle as well, as we think of these people as being very, very separate, right? Rothbard and Che and Lenin, but I mean, I think it's true today, just like it always has been. There's only so many intellectuals working at a particular time.
Yeah.
And they probably are closer than you think.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, I always think about that drawing that Frederick Engels made of Max Stirner.
Yeah.
Smoking a cigarette, being a bad influence.
Yeah. Are you gonna write something for the Mutual Exchange, or you got too much on your plate?
Yeah, I got too much on my plate right now. I wanted to write something about religion and egoism, which is kind of
love that.
Yeah, that's kind of why I ended up doing that interview with Joel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we get into that a little bit. I feel like I kind of already gave you the all the pieces, right, without really putting them together.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just think it's very interesting. Because I don't know if we have an essay on that yet, but I think it's kind of fascinating. As someone who I've only grown more sympathetic to aspects of religion and spirituality the last few years, where I was never really sympathetic to them growing up. And but seeing, but I discussed this in the introduction and in some of the questions that I included, like how, like, is this a reconcilable issue, or do egoists have to totally do away with any kind of religion or spirituality? And like part of the broader question of how egoists relate to like any type of collective identity, whether it be religion or gender or race or class, or any type of, the nature of these identities is radically different, but on some level they're all these collective identity. So I think the relationship between like how egoism grounds that and how we should relate to that stuff is kind of fascinating. Because you don't want to like you need to be able to like engage in the real world and acknowledge the existence of in many cases these imposed collective identities, right? But you don't want to like entrench them further. But then also you want to like reclaim some, maybe like in their case of religion. So I don't know. I think there's so many interesting kind of overlaps with this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I would say the short version of it, right, is which direction the impetus is coming from, right? If a bunch of individuals feel a shared identity in something, that is different from the imposition of identity from outside, or trying to change who you are individually, right, in order to fit some kind of identity or membership in a group. But I think that the even deeper thing is that kind of ontology of egoism I was talking about earlier. If we take it at its most mystical, for me, it has some implications about divinity as well. And so, I kind of look at it as not just being a source of creation in the sense of like we can make art, but the source of creation in the sense of like this is where things come from, is our ability to have consciousness. Like the existence of the universe comes from our ability to have consciousness, the individual consciousnesses. And this actually also fits a lot better with Jewish conceptions of what divinity is than the Christian conception of what divinity is. In the sense of, you might have heard the many points of light interpretation.
It sounds familiar, but I can tell you, I can not tell you.
Mm. Yeah, so my understanding of it is that one way of looking at Judaism is that divinity has been smashed into many fragments, which are points of light, and the practices that are required by Judaism are practices intended to bring the points of light together, and that fits very well with this, egoist ontology that I have, which is your individuality, the human individual mind, right, is a fragment of divinity. That's where creativity comes from. That's, the most fundamental force, I think, in the universe, right? So yeah, that's
Okay.
getting into it.
Well, it's so funny to me to that because you still want to call this, you still want to find an egoism here, but to me, I mean, because I don't think that's an entirely uncommon way of thinking about the human mind as a kind of, I mean, I don't know, instantiation of of something divine, of something more unified, um, of some higher level phenomena. So I don't, but that lends itself so easily towards this kind of universalist view. It's.
Well, it depends on how you look at the division, right? Like if you think of it as a whole that has been divided, that is different from a whole made up of wholes, right?
Huh. Okay.
To get Aristotle talks about wholeness, right?
Yes. Sure. So, but you're saying no. This is interesting. You're saying you're preferring the fractured version. You're saying that's more accurate.
No, I'm saying the whole made up of wholes.
Oh! I see. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is so. I feel like this kind of maps on to sometimes different analogies we give to love, which sometimes we say it's like two halves make a whole, but you're saying no. Like a better way to think about it is like instead of the phrase.
Phrase about love?
Yeah, I think it's like a Rush lyric, actually.
Perfect.
Yeah. Do you like Rush at all?
I enjoy Rush when I have heard them, but I have not like sat down and listened or sought it out. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a fan.
Yeah. Oh, I like Rush. I only really got it in the last few years, but they're good. I'm looking up to see if I can find this, but I'm not. Here. Okay, yeah. So it's a lyric. I'm such an idiot. I'm like saying this is like a phrase that people say, and I'm thinking of a Rush lyric. But no,
our audience might know it.
No, it just I guess sometimes I think about things and like forget like where I heard of them, but like they stay in my mind as like a useful way that you might think about something. So anyway, it's the Rush song "The Speed of Love," which is good, and they have like the best. They're like the most deep like rock lyrics. Usually not that much depth there, especially for bands of their time like Zeppelin or The Who, are usually like, and I like those bands, but their lyrics are a little more shallow, where Rush is coming from that more philosophical mindset. Like their lyrics are pretty weird sometimes. And anyway, they have a line in the song "The Speed of Love" called where says where two halves make two wholes. So instead of two halves making one whole, it's like that's why what you said reminded me of this. Like this more like almost like positive sum vision of the human mind.
Right.
Is that like kind of
and I think that's and that goes along with how I think about like, you know, humans in community as well, right? Is
yes,
we are better able to express and be ourselves with other people.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that absolutely. It doesn't just have to be romantic love, and that line can be interpreted as yes, as you know, the existence of others makes my life fuller. It makes my life bigger. It doesn't detract from it in some way.
Right. Unless that person is trying to dominate or control you, right?
Yeah, well, I would say that in that case, their actions are detracting and harming my life for sure. But like, if I could stop their actions without extinguishing their, you know, little spark of divinity, I think that's preferable, right? I think like why, like if you could stop the actions without doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We joked about talking about Cloud Atlas. Do you want to talk about Cloud Atlas real quick and then turn it out?
Yeah, we can talk about Cloud Atlas. Yeah.
So why did you love that movie so much?
I love that movie so much because it's really unlike any other movie I've seen. Because for those who don't know, Cloud Atlas is like a 2012, I think, film by the Wachowski sisters, adapting. Oh, and there's a third co-director. I can't remember, but it's adapting a novel which I haven't read, but I've heard it's good. And what makes it weird is that it's I think 6 concurrent stories running, and so it switches back and forth between these stories and different. Like ones in the 1800s during the slave trade, and other ones all the way hundreds of years from now in like a dystopian sci-fi setting. And there's everything in between. So it weaves and cuts back and forth. And so I just really love how cutting between these different lives and timelines illuminates the universal, right? It illuminates the commonalities in the human condition that is shared by every timeline and every story, and the struggles of the protagonists in each little thing. What about you? So what did you like about it?
Yeah, so I read the novel as well, which I would say is as good as, if not better than the movie.
Oh, I should read that then.
Yeah, just because, I mean, one of the great things about the film is that I think they did a really good job with sets and with really making these different worlds visually stunning and interesting. But one of the cool things about the book is you get to know the characters a little better. So that was one of the things I liked there.
Yeah, books are good at that.
But yeah, right. More time to do it. But yeah, so one of the things I really liked about it is what you mentioned, right? There's this kind of revelation of the universal through the particular, which is just like really cool to see. But I also like the way in which all the worlds influenced each other, right? So there's small bits, right? And you see how they kind of bleed through into each world. And to me, that was really great for, you know, making me think about the ways in which everything is connected, and, you know, the incredibly long impact of historical decisions, and inability to predict how what we do today will impact the future. Right. Just really great for thinking about those things.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's like there's 2 levels of interconnectedness. Because on the one hand, on the plot level, you're saying like every story causally impacts the subsequent story, and I can't remember them all, but like you go through, like I know the journal entries of the first story are read by the man in the second story and influence him, and then so on throughout. And I know the androids in some of the later stories are influenced by the movie based on the guy at the retirement home. So it's like this, the plot, everything that happens hundreds of years in the future depend on what happened in the past stories, which is fascinating. But then there's also the level of interconnectedness, which is not united by the plot, but it's just like, you know, you cut between shots. Like one of my favorite moments in the movie is they're showing the slave on the slave ship being shot at as he's running across the sails, putting them down, and then it cuts to just a mirror shot to the android and the Neo Soul timeline running across a bar just like that, being shot at by the authorities, perfectly mirroring each other and the struggles. And I just love how, I mean, I would say movies are definitely my favorite form of art. And I love how they're able to convey things kind of in that way, in this very visually oriented, you don't have to say anything. It kind of makes you experience that connectedness between stories that are in no way similar, except that there's that similar struggle of liberation.
Right. And I think this is one of the really powerful things is their stories about liberation against this backdrop of interconnectedness and influence. And so one of the things I took away is you start to get this feeling of like everything's predetermined. What does it even matter to keep fighting against these things? And then you have characters do exactly that, right? Yes. Break the mold, continue to fight. And to me, that's really inspiring. But I was heavily impacted by the soundtrack as well, and particularly the Cloud Atlas Sextet with the story of Robert Frobisher. I won't say any more about what happens there, but I still feel lots of things when I listen to that song.
Oh, sure, yes, yeah. Frobisher's storyline, without spoiling it, is quite the storyline. That I don't think I'd much listen to the soundtrack just by itself, but maybe I should. I know in the movie I love how it works, and I also thought it was just neat what you said. Like you're right about how almost like paradoxically it gives you sometimes this feeling of why bother, why resist, why struggle, because it is predetermined in some way. While at the same time like affirming the struggle. I think it's kind of fascinating. I really love, I could talk about the directors, the Wachowskis, all day. I love a lot of their movies, not just Cloud Atlas. I see a lot of similar themes too with Cloud Atlas, as in their show Sense8, as in the Matrix movies. But the line that sticks to me from Cloud Atlas, to me, that's like kind of sums up the whole movie, and it's like the emotional climax, and it really illustrates the way the Wachowskis play with these dichotomies. And that is at the end, a character basically turns down, he basically leaves the slave trade, and because he met a slave and saw what it was, and that they're human and that it was wrong. And so when he's saying, he's going to leave, and then the villain, the slave trader guy, his like boss, is telling him, it's not going to make a difference what you're doing at all. You're not going to affect anything. And as we know, slavery was abolished like a couple decades after that this is taking place in the real world. Right. But he says what you do is not going to do anything. It's going to be a drop in the ocean. And then the protagonist responds, but what is an ocean but a multitude of drops? Right. And I feel like that's kind of thematic to what we've been talking about with egoism, with reconciling the kind of universalist kind of cosmic perspective. It's the ocean, but also an ocean. I mean, it doesn't even exist without each individual drop in of itself being like this instantiation of the broader thing. So I always think of that line often when I'm thinking of Cloud Atlas or not, actually.
Yeah. Well, you know what my favorite line is, and I don't remember who says it in the movie, but it's throughout the book. This line that all boundaries are conventions waiting to be transcended. So like as an abolitionist and someone focused on liberation,
I remember that line.
I think that echoed very, very heavily with me, that all boundaries are conventions waiting to be transcended.
Oh yes. I think it's kind of fascinating. I remember that line. I can't remember who says it in the movie.
Yeah, maybe it's the author guy. I don't know. I don't remember who says it.
But I wonder, I mean, and now I'm risking getting it into a tangent. I know, but just I am curious. I have to ask, like, if all boundaries are meant to be transcended, I mean, do you apply that as well to the boundary between the selves? Because to me, there's like a tension here with egoism, or there might be. Like, how stable is the self and the ego? Like, is that not part of this just boundaryless?
I think it depends on I think it depends on like the definition of transcendence, right?
Yeah.
Because the like we were talking about before, the creation of a larger whole out of wholes, to me that would count as transcendence, right?
Okay. Yes. But the ego is never lost in that for you. Like that's still
Right.
that's still like a definable, like you can focus in on that, and that's like a real point, like a real entity. Okay.
I definitely think so. I mean,
No, I think so too.
I'm always open to
No, I find
I'm always open to being wrong.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good note maybe for us to wrap up on. I think we've crossed many a boundary in the past hour and 50 minutes.
Yeah. Thanks for staying on so long.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure. I mean, I love talking to you. This was just fun for just as a conversation with you. So happy it can be our episode as well.
For sure. Yeah, and I'm excited to get to show folks a little bit more about both of us, since they're going to be hearing our voices throughout the next year.
Yeah, that's good.
So actually, on that note, is there a good way for folks to reach you for things like guest suggestions, etc.?
I love guest suggestions. Let me know about guest suggestions. You can probably just Twitter is easy. My Twitter is just my name, Cory Massimino. Or you can email me. My email is just corymassimino@gmail.com. Also, if you want my book chapter, because the book, like I mentioned that earlier, but the handbook itself is like crazy expensive. So I'll send anyone my own chapter for free if they want it. Just let me know through either of those, and or guest suggestions or anything or whatever.
Questions about Cloud Atlas.
Sure, yeah. I mean, let's not overdo it though. Like I have a life to live, but sure. And then where do people contact you, Alex? I know you're.
I'm very easy to find. I'm McHugh_Alex on Twitter. Or if you email the editor account, editor@c4ss.org, I check that pretty regularly. All right. Well, thanks again. This was really cool. And
yeah, it was. Thank you for the chat. It's been great.
Looking forward to getting more episodes out with you.
Yeah. Hope viewers are excited. I know you have one with Sarah, right?
Yeah, we're gonna be recording a week from today. Actually.
Oh, okay, great. That'll be super exciting. Yeah, sounds good.